Hello and welcome. Today, we delve into a web of deception, chaos, and human tragedy that unfolded during one of the most pivotal moments of World War II, the Battle of the Bulge. But what if I told you that beneath the battle lines, a secret operation aimed to infiltrate the very heart of American defenses using nothing but disguises, lies, and cultural manipulation? Could German soldiers have disguised themselves so convincingly that they blurred the line between ally and enemy? How did a handful of spies wearing American uniforms ignite a wave of paranoia so intense that it paralyzed entire armies? Were the executions of captured infiltrators based on solid evidence or a desperate attempt to maintain order amid chaos? And what role did America's own culture, baseball, Hollywood, state caps, play in exposing these clandestine threats? Imagine soldiers questioning their comrades with bizarre queries about Mickey Mouse's girlfriend or Wrigley Field, suspecting everyone might be an enemy in disguise. Could a young officer's quick suspicion at a Belgian checkpoint lead to the arrest of Germans posing as Americans, only to spark a nationwide security panic? And beneath the surface of these events, a clandestine plan was set in motion, one that involved disguising German units as American troops, with the aim to sow confusion and sabotage from within. But how close did they come to succeeding? The central question is, how did a small group of infiltrators, and the fear they ignited, influence the entire course of the war? This video will take you through the shocking truth, separating fact from fiction, unveiling the secret operations, and exposing the tremendous human cost behind the chaos. Now, prepare to step into the depths of wartime deception, because the story begins right now. December 17, 1944. On the outskirts of WWII, a small Belgian town, a military checkpoint stood silently amidst the icy morning landscape. A rugged jeep approached, its engine humming softly as it paused abruptly. The motion was halted by the raised hand of a stern military policeman, whose breath fogged in the crisp winter air, creating fleeting clouds that momentarily masked the tense stillness. Inside the vehicle sat three soldiers clad in uniforms that bore the unmistakable colors and style of American military attire, dresses that seemed authentic enough to deceive an untrained eye. Their weapons appeared to conform to what was standard issue, and their spoken English sounded nearly perfect, giving an outward impression of familiarity and trustworthiness. However, Sergeant William Creel, the commanding officer at this checkpoint, had been forewarned about a threat that defied the natural laws of warfare and shattered conventional notions of military honor. According to intelligence reports, it was possible, though seemingly impossible, that German soldiers had infiltrated American lines dressed identically as American soldiers, speaking our language with convincing fluency. Such deception posed a dire threat, and so Creel, maintaining unwavering alertness, demanded to know the secret password that would authenticate their identity. The three men hesitated momentarily, their expressions flickering with uncertainty. Creel repeated his question, his voice firm but also probing. As he looked more closely, he noticed the subtle cracks in their composure, the hesitation, the slight stumble over words, the unnatural certainty of their answers. Then, his gaze fell upon their firearms, revealing the telltale signs of British-made weapons, Sten guns, that no legitimate American patrol would ever carry. His instincts kicked in instantaneously. Within a matter of minutes, the three men were apprehended, their uniforms quickly stripped away to reveal the underlying fabric of deception. Beneath the olive-drab clothing, they were revealed to be Germans dressed in enemy uniforms dyed in the dull gray of German field gear. The identities of these prisoners, Untisha Manfred Peruz, Oberfenrig Gunther Billing, and Geda Wilhelm Schmidt, would soon become infamous within the fierce and brutal Battle of the Bulge. To the Allied forces, they would symbolize the cunning and ruthless deception employed by the Germans. Yet, what none of these captured soldiers could possibly realize was that their arrest would ignite an unprecedented wave of paranoia that would sweep through the entire American military establishment. This tumultuous period would spark a systematic campaign aimed at cultural interrogation, transforming ordinary checkpoints into nerve-wracking interrogations that felt more like quiz shows. Every conversation, every exchange of words, was scrutinized for signs of disloyalty. Every soldier became a potential threat, a spy hiding within. The methods of detection during this period were no longer confined to cryptography and complex ciphers. Instead, intelligence operatives relied on the most unexpected tools: baseball statistics, knowledge of state capitals, and Hollywood gossip. The process of uncovering hidden enemies had begun months earlier, on October 22, 1944, deep within Adolf Hitler's command headquarters at Rastenburg, nestled in East Prussia. In that tense gathering, Hitler summoned SS Obergruppenführer Otto Scott C., a highly esteemed and fearsome officer. The Führer addressed him with known words that would forever alter the course of the final, desperate months of the war. Hitler entrusted Scott C. with a mission, one that would require deception on an unprecedented scale. Scott C., already recognized as one of Germany's most formidable and feared commandos, was tasked with orchestrating covert operations that would test the limits of wartime ingenuity. By September of the previous year, Scott C. had already gained notoriety for his daring exploits. Leading a glider assault that daringly rescued Benito Mussolini from his mountain prison at Gran Sasso, whisking the fallen Italian dictator away in a light airplane that barely skimmed over treacherous rocky cliffs. In October of the same year, he had engineered the kidnapping of Miklos Horthy Jr., forcing the regent of Hungary to resign and effectively keeping Hungary embroiled in the war, despite mounting Allied pressures and internal struggles within the Axis powers. Now, Hitler revealed to Scott C. his most audacious and ambitious plan yet. The German military would initiate a colossal counteroffensive through the dense forests of the Ardennes, aiming to break through the Allied lines and push toward the strategically vital port of Antwerp. The objective was clear: to divide and conquer, splitting the British and American forces and recreating the stunning German victories of May 1940, when the panzer divisions had swiftly reached the English Channel in mere days. Yet, unlike previous campaigns, the success of this operation would hinge critically on rapid maneuvering and swift execution. The Germans faced a race against time. They needed to seize at least one bridge over the Meuse River, still intact and unguarded, before the Allied engineers could destroy it to halt their advance. Scott C. was ordered to organize a special elite unit, designated as the Panzer Brigade 100, and Scozzini and his team donned uniforms borrowed from both American and British soldiers, a strategic deception aimed at sowing chaos on the battlefield. The concept was simple yet deadly effective. Small units disguising themselves in enemy attire could, according to Hitler, cause enormous confusion among Allied forces, disrupting their communications, leading troops astray, and igniting widespread panic. Such tactics relied on the premise that enemy uniforms, when used in combat, could blur the lines of identity, making it difficult for defenders to distinguish friend from foe. Scorzani, listening intently to these plans, understood the gravity and the legal ramifications of such maneuvers instantly. The rules of warfare, as laid out in the Hague Convention of 1907, were explicit. Soldiers caught fighting while dressed in the enemy's uniform forfeited their rights as prisoners of war and could be executed on the spot as spies or saboteurs. This legal framework made the use of enemy disguises a deeply risky affair, sparking a vigorous debate among high-ranking officers, including General Alfred Jodl and Field Marshal Georg von Rundstedt. Hitler, however, confidently assured Scott-C that the tactic was fully legitimate, so long as his men stripped off the enemy's uniforms before engaging in combat, thus avoiding legal repercussions. Within a very short span of time, Scott-C submitted detailed plans to General Jodl. He requested a force of approximately 3,300 men, all fluent in English and possessing a good command of American idioms and dialects, to execute covert operations behind enemy lines. On the 25th of October, the Oberkommando des Westens, Germany's high command on the Western Front, issued an order directing every headquarters to identify and gather volunteers who could speak English in secret commando missions. This directive was signed personally by Field Marshal Wilhelm Kittel, emphasizing the importance of selecting soldiers with impeccable English skills and familiarity with American slang. That particular detail suggesting the Germans' intention to mimic and infiltrate more accurately. Scott-C was aware that this message would rapidly reach Allied intelligence networks. Although he desperately wanted to halt the operation, fearing it might be compromised or reveal too much, Hitler refused his plea for cancellation. The Germans were determined to proceed, convinced that even if the Allies intercepted their orders, they would dismiss it as a false alarm or a mere bluff, unable to believe that the Germans would be so audacious as to organize an infiltration of this nature. Indeed, the Allied forces intercepted the instruction on the 30th of November, but initial assessments dismissed the message as mere German deception. Many intelligence officers refused to believe that the Germans would take such a blatant risk, dismissing the coded message as a mere ruse or mistake. Meanwhile, volunteers from all branches of the German military began to materialize, many without really understanding what they had signed up for. Fritz Priest, a young 21-year-old private in the Luftwaffe, trained as an English translator, initially thought he was being sent to interrogate American prisoners from a safe distance, far from the chaos of combat. However, instead of that peaceful assignment, he found himself isolated behind barbed wire at a secret training camp established at Grafenwehr, nestled in the eastern region of Bavaria. Security at the camp was tight as a vault. Every step was monitored relentlessly, and one unfortunate soldier was shot dead for writing a letter home that contained too much detail, revealing sensitive information that could compromise the operation. The recruits only learned the true nature of their mission after they arrived and underwent a rigorous induction process. The grim reality of Scott-C's plans became apparent, and although it might seem almost comical, given the scant resources and chaos involved, the stakes left no room for levity. From an initial pool of approximately 2,500 men, only a tiny fraction possessed perfect English, with a clear understanding of American idioms and slang, around 10 men in total. Another 30 to 40 had a good grasp of English but lacked familiarity with American colloquialisms, while between 120 to 150 could speak English moderately well. The remaining recruits knew only basic school-level English, barely capable of uttering simple words or phrases like, yes, or no. Scott-C later penned in his reports that after a few weeks of training and preparation, the entire situation seemed almost unbearably terrifying, especially given the limited language skills and subpar equipment. For those with limited English ability, the instructions were bizarre and largely impractical. They were told to shout, "Sorry," if approached by American soldiers, then quickly open their trousers and pretend to be suffering from diarrhea, escaping the situation in an unconvincing manner. The equipment situation was also dire. The German High Command requested that the Western Front supply 15 well-maintained Sherman tanks, 20 armored cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps, 40 motorcycles, 120 trucks, and enough British and American uniforms to outfit the entire force. Unfortunately, the reality was vastly different from the plan. The delivery failed to meet requirements in almost immediately after the decision was made. The unit found itself in a state of chaos and confusion, far removed from the precise and well-planned operation they had envisioned. Instead of the standard American armor that was originally requested and expected, the brigade was equipped with a confusing array of German equipment. Specifically, they received 5 Panther tanks, 6 armored cars, 6 armored personnel carriers, and 5 Sturmtiger assault guns, all of which were German-made, not American. The Panthers had been hastily camouflaged by applying sheet metal cladding and painting them with olive drab paint, and they bore white star insignia, a symbol typically associated with American forces. However, Skorzeny, the commanding officer, franked the reality of these makeshift disguises, admitting that these Panther tanks would only deceive very inexperienced American soldiers, particularly those observing from a significant distance at night and under ideal conditions. The situation regarding uniforms was even more problematic and chaotic. Many of the soldiers were dressed in uniforms from Britain, Poland, or Russia, and some of these uniforms were issued in summer variants, despite the fact that December was already well into winter, making the attire unsuitable for the harsh conditions. In addition to the diversity of national uniforms, some soldiers bore the grim evidence of recent combat, blood stains, while others displayed the letter P marked with paint or other symbols on their uniforms, further complicating the identification process. Across the German-occupied territories, units, all of whom were unsure of the specific requirements of this covert operation, responded by sending whatever uniforms and equipment they could find. As a result, the brigade was flooded with a mixture of Polish and Russian gear, originating from units that had no clear understanding of the operation's true purpose or objectives. Despite the chaos, Skorzeny managed to secure a relatively limited supply of authentic American uniforms and weapons, which he allocated solely for his specialized commando teams. Recognizing the importance of effective communication and the need for discreet infiltration, he formed a highly trained unit composed of the English-speaking specialists, who were designated as Einheil, a name derived from SS Captain Ernstello, who was chosen to lead these elite teams. These commandos underwent intensive training sessions despite the extremely compressed timeline, with the aim of preparing them for their covert tasks behind enemy lines. During their training, the teams immersed themselves in studying the organizational structure of the American Army, meticulously learning the various badges of rank, military customs, and drill procedures that distinguished U.S. soldiers from their German counterparts. Some of the commandos were even sent to specialized camps at Kustrin and Lindbergh, where they practiced fluent English with captured American soldiers, enhancing their ability to blend in seamlessly during their missions. To perfect their accents and master current slang, they watched American movies, absorbing language patterns, mannerisms, and cultural nuances. In addition to linguistic training, they memorized a wide array of American brand names, sports teams, popular songs, and Hollywood stars, aiming to mirror the everyday behaviors and interests of American soldiers. The commandos practiced walking, smoking, and even chewing gum just as Americans did, aiming for utmost authenticity in their portrayal. Their missions were categorized into 3 main strategic operations. First, demolition squads consisting of 5 to 6 men were tasked with destroying critical infrastructure such as bridges, ammunition depots, and fuel stores, targets vital for hampering enemy logistics and troop movements. Second, reconnaissance patrols composed of 3 to 4 soldiers would undertake scouting missions along both sides of the Meuse River, passing on false intelligence, reversing road signs to confuse the enemy, removing dangerous minefield warnings, and cordoning off roads with fabricated warnings of invisible mines to mislead German defenses. Third, certain lead commando units would work directly with the attacking German forces, cutting telephone and radio lines, destroying communication stations, and issuing misleading orders to sow chaos and confusion among the enemy ranks. The risks inherent in these operations were substantial and life-threatening. If captured while dressed in American uniform, the commandos knew their fate was almost certain death, execution. However, the danger extended beyond enemy capture. In the turbulent and unpredictable atmosphere of combat, there was also a significant risk of being mistaken for genuine Americans by German troops. If this happened, the consequences could be deadly, as friendly fire or summary executions were very real threats. To mitigate these risks, the commandos relied on a carefully devised system of signals and markings for identification. Vehicles would display a small yellow triangle visible from a distance, providing a visual cue of their true allegiance. Tanks would adopt specific gun positions, and soldiers wore colored scarves beneath their uniforms, details intended to help distinguish them from genuine Allied personnel amidst the chaos of battle. On the 14th of December, the Panzer Brigade numbered 150 men assembled near Bad Münstereifel, preparing for the crucial operation ahead. By the afternoon of the 16th of December, they commenced movement, advancing behind 3 Panzer divisions that had been tasked with a broader attack. The detailed plan called for Skorzany's disguised forces commanded by the experienced and strategically astute Joachim Peiper. The German offensive that was unfolding carried the weight of meticulous planning and daring execution. Peiper's armored spearheads were designed to punch through the thin American lines with relentless force, creating chaos and confusion in their wake. If his armored units managed to break through swiftly and decisively, the vulnerable Allied troops, scattered along the 80-mile front, would be thrown into disarray. Amid the chaos, covert German teams, disguised in American uniforms, could then exploit the confusion, slipping through the crumpled defenses unnoticed, and reach critical points such as the bridges before the American engineers could destroy them. This operation was a complex dance of deception and swift penetration, meant to destabilize the Allies' logistical and strategic positions at a crucial moment in the battle. The day began before dawn on December 16, 1944, a day shrouded in darkness and the cold silence of the Ardennes forest. Under the cover of night, more than 200,000 German soldiers surged forward into the dense wooded terrain, unleashing what would be known as Hitler's final great offensive in the Western theater of World War II. From the outset, their assault caught the American defenders completely off guard, achieving total surprise across the entire northern flank. The American troops, spread thin over an expansive 80-mile front, found themselves outnumbered and overwhelmed, an intimidating reality that hindered their ability to mount an effective defense. In the initial hours of the attack, 4 American divisions, many of whom were inexperienced or battle-wearied from previous encounters, stood against 30 German divisions, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks. The thunder of German artillery shattered the peaceful, frozen morning, sending deadly shells plunging into American positions and leaving destruction in their wake. Bright searchlights sliced through the low-hanging clouds, casting stark illumination over the chaotic battlefield, as both sides struggled to organize amid the pandemonium. Meanwhile, German infantry pressed forward through the snow-covered forests, their movements coordinated yet frantic, attempting to seize key strategic points. Armored panzers rumbled relentlessly along narrow, snow-laden roads, their iron tracks gouging through the frozen earth, in tight formations that aimed to maximize their destructive potential. During the first critical hours, everything appeared to proceed according to the German plan, with success seemingly imminent. Among the chaos, specialized teams dubbed the Einhalle units began to infiltrate deeper into American-held territory, taking advantage of the confusion. Disguised in American uniforms and riding in captured jeeps, these teams navigated through the thick fog of war, slipping past scattered American units in silent shadows. One such team boldly drove into a town held by the Americans, meticulously scouting the defenses and gathering critical intelligence. On their way out, they cleverly redirected an American convoy of armor and supplies onto the wrong route, leading the enemy astray. Meanwhile, other Einhalle units successfully misled Allied logistical movements by intercepting and rerouting supply convoys, effectively sowing discord among the advancing and retreating forces alike. The covert operatives also undertook deliberate sabotage, cutting telephone wires to paralyze communication, removing or obscuring road signs to disorient the Allied retreat, and spreading false rumors suggesting that the German breakthrough was more extensive and deeper than it actually was. In this way, they attempted to magnify the chaos and weaken the resolve of the American defenders even further. However, by December 17, the harsh reality of the battlefield, its unexpected resilience and fierce resistance, began to undermine the German operation's initial promising outlook. The 1st Waffen-SS Panzer Division failed to reach its objectives on the scheduled timetable. American soldiers defending at Ellenborn Ridge fiercely resisted the advance, denying the Germans control of the northern roads critical for their logistical plans. At St. Vith, American defenders mounted a stubborn and determined resistance, successfully delaying the German timetable by nearly a full week. These delays were catastrophic for the Germans, as the rapid breakthrough, an essential element for the success of Operation Greif, simply did not materialize as planned. Realizing the grim truth that their initial objectives were slipping beyond reach, Skorzeny, the commander overseeing the operations, understood that the overall mission was doomed. The failure of key units to reach their targets on time, combined with persistent American resistance, meant that the hoped-for swift victory was no longer feasible. Later that day, during a staff meeting at the 6th Panzer Army headquarters, Skorzeny proposed a desperate but pragmatic shift in strategy. His brigade, originally tasked with special operations, should be reorganized and used as a conventional fighting force. This suggestion was approved, reflecting the growing acknowledgement that the original plan was unraveling. Subsequently, the Panzer Brigade 150 was ordered to assemble south of Malmö, ready to report directly to the 1st SS Panzer Division. Yet, by this time, the elite commandos from the Einhalle units had already infiltrated behind American lines. Some of these operatives there has never been any concrete evidence to verify the existence of such a plan. All that is known is that the original objective was to seize key bridges spanning the Meuse River. Yet, despite the lack of factual confirmation, the mention of such a strategy had immediate and far-reaching repercussions. In the wake of that statement, the security measures surrounding General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied forces, were drastically intensified over a very short span of time. Remarkably, within hours of the announcement, Eisenhower found himself virtually confined within his own headquarters situated at Versailles, a fortress-like setting designed to prevent any potential threats. Guards were posted at every entrance, rigorously inspecting each person seeking entry into his command center, effectively transforming his familiar meeting ground into a highly secure cage. The general was reportedly infuriated by this unprecedented confinement, especially considering that it persisted through the Christmas holiday, a time typically associated with family and celebration but now overshadowed by suspicion and fear. After enduring days of this enhanced security protocol, Eisenhower, visibly enraged and perhaps feeling suffocated by the restrictions, proclaiming that he must find a way to escape. He declared openly that he was willing to face any consequences, even if it meant risking his own life, simply because he refused to be held prisoner against his will. This heightened paranoia did not remain confined to Eisenhower himself. It rapidly spilled over into the entire Allied military apparatus, which was already strained and vulnerable due to the ongoing German offensive. Suddenly, checkpoints appeared everywhere along the Allied rear areas, which had previously been relatively secure. These new security checkpoints significantly hampered the movement of troops, equipment, and supplies, causing delays and logistical headaches that affected the overall war effort. American military policemen, tasked with maintaining order and security, began conducting interrogations of every soldier passing through these checkpoints. Their questions, seemingly random and often bizarre, were designed to identify possible German infiltrators disguised as American personnel. Some of the questions posed included: what is the capital of Illinois? Who won the World Series in 1940? Who is Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? Which team plays at Wrigley Field? Who is married to Betty Grable? Where does the guard stand in a football formation? Who is Frank Sinatra? What is the name of the president's dog? These inquiries ranged widely, from questions about geography, sports statistics, Hollywood gossip, to American slang. The MPs, in an effort to outwit potential spies, improvised constantly, creating new questions inspired by whatever American trivia came to mind. This interrogation system quickly devolved into chaos and often absurdity. Many genuine American soldiers struggled to answer these questions correctly. The diversity within the United States meant that soldiers from different regions had varying levels of knowledge about each other's local details, like state capitals or popular sports teams. Educational disparities also meant that some soldiers, especially those with limited schooling, had never learned basic facts such as the capitals of their own states or followed professional baseball. The consequences of this chaotic questioning extended beyond mere inconvenience. For instance, General Omar Bradley was detained, simply because he correctly identified Springfield as the capital of Illinois. The military policeman, convinced that Chicago was the correct answer, held him until further verification could be made. Similarly, Brigadier General Bruce Clark was taken at gunpoint after incorrectly asserting that the Chicago Cubs played in the American League. A captain was detained for an entire week after authorities discovered he had German combat boots he had taken as souvenirs, leading to suspicions of espionage or disloyalty. The British soldiers encountered particular difficulties in complying with these protocols. When reconnaissance officer David Nann was questioned by a guard demanding to know the outcome of the 1940 World Series, he could only reply that he had no idea. Many British troops, unacquainted with American sports or geography, found themselves detained until their identities could be confirmed through alternative means. Some American soldiers, frustrated by the absurdity of the questioning, deliberately provided false answers to protest the irrational process. Others, irritated by being interrogated by junior enlisted men rather than officers, reacted with confrontations that only further delayed troop movements. The pervasive paranoia and suspicion had profound repercussions on military operations, as what should have been a matter of hours, moving troops and supplies, instead stretched into days, with each vehicle and personnel thoroughly scrutinized and delayed at every step, severely hampering the Allied war effort at a crucial time. The operation ground to a halt abruptly, and every person present was subjected to rigorous questioning. Supply convoys, which normally moved swiftly through checkpoints, now stood idling, as drivers found themselves pressed to verify their American identity through a series of increasingly detailed and intrusive inquiries. These delays were not limited to mere inconveniences. They significantly hampered efforts to reinforce vulnerable sectors, as units rushing to bolster threatened zones faced relentless interrogations that slowed their advance and placed entire operations at risk. The leaders directing these units soon found their commands subjected to skepticism from underlings who grew suspicious of everyone around them, fearing that among their ranks and the civilian population might lurk enemy infiltrators disguised in American uniforms. This created an atmosphere of suspicion and confusion within the ranks, as basic trust eroded under the constant threat of infiltration. For the infiltrators themselves, the psychological toll was immense, as the overwhelming scrutiny and suspicion cast a long shadow over their intent and resolve. Those still operating behind the relative safety of American lines encountered a series of unexpected obstacles. Despite their careful preparations, which included memorizing military procedures, understanding rank insignias, and internalizing the structure of the American armed forces, they found themselves unprepared for the intense cultural and social questioning they now faced. The interrogators asked questions about baseball statistics, Hollywood marriages, or regional slang. Topics that had little bearing on military tactics but proved immensely challenging for the infiltrators, who had not anticipated such seemingly trivial yet psychologically disruptive inquiries. In an effort to evade detection, some infiltrators took drastic measures, avoiding checkpoints altogether by traveling across country terrains or venturing through wilderness areas, hoping to fly under our radar. However, this strategy often made them even more conspicuous to patrols inspecting remote areas, increasing the likelihood of their capture. Others tried to bluff their way through checkpoints by offering false explanations and fabricating stories, attempting to obfuscate their true identities and intentions, but such attempts rarely succeeded. Between the 16th and the 31st of December, American forces apprehended a total of 23 individuals connected with Operation Greif. The majority of these captures occurred in December of that same year, with the team leader, Gauss Schultz, being detained later on and subsequently tried in May of the following year. Each of those captured faced military trials grounded in the legal framework provided by international law, which clearly stipulated the legality of such proceedings. According to the provisions of the Hague Convention concerning land warfare, it was explicitly forbidden to improperly use enemy military insignia and uniforms. Soldiers captured donning enemy uniforms and insignia while engaged in military operations could be classified as spies rather than granted the protections afforded to prisoners of war. This legal distinction was of vital importance, and as such, the first trials took place at Hungry-Chapelle, starting on the 21st of December, with the accused being brought before military tribunals to face the charges. Among those tried in these cases were Pernas, Billing, and Schmidt, who stood accused of breaching the laws of war by wearing American uniforms while conducting covert operations. The evidence against them was irrefutable. They had been captured wearing American military gear, armed with American weapons, carrying American identification, yet beneath their uniforms, they wore German field gray patches, revealing their true allegiance. The prosecution presented overwhelming proof establishing their guilt. The proceedings moved quickly, and all three defendants were convicted of espionage and related offenses. Their sentences were pronounced, and in a swift and decisive judgment, they were sentenced to death by firing squad. This execution took place on the 23rd of December, with just 2 days remaining before Christmas, a somber reminder of the gravity of their breach of wartime conduct. American military police escorted the condemned men to the execution site, where Captain J. Iser, a medic from the 633rd Medical Clearing Station, carefully placed white paper targets over their hearts, signifying the finality of their fate. Schmidt's glasses were removed to prevent any distraction, and the prisoners were blindfolded in preparation for their execution. The soldiers forming the firing squad took their positions silently as the order was given. In a final act of defiance, Billing shouted, "Long live our Führer Adolf Hitler," a comment that underscored the depth of his loyalty to the German cause despite the circumstances. The rifles were raised and fired at once, and within moments, all 3 men were declared dead, their bodies collapsing to the ground. The deceased were quickly removed and taken away, to be buried in accordance with military protocols. Their remains were later transported and interred at the German military cemetery located at Lommel, in Belgium, where they now rest alongside more than 39,000 other German soldiers who lost their lives during the war. Beyond these 3, a total of 13 additional participants of Operation Greif faced trial and execution at either Hungry Chapelle or WWII between December 16 and December 31, with their names such as Wilhelm Wiesenfeld, Manfred Brani, Hans Reich, Arno Kroer, Gunter Schultz, Norbert Pollack, Ralph Benjamin Meyer, Hans Witzuk, Otto, Alfred Franz, and Anton Morik, all individuals associated with clandestine operations. Each faced the grim fate of facing firing squads. These executions were not spontaneous acts but followed formal military trials, where each defendant was formally judged, found guilty of violating the agreement known as the HEG Convention, which governed covert and undercover activities among combatants. Every verdict was subsequently subjected to scrutiny and approval by higher-ranking military commanders, underscoring the procedural rigor and the grave seriousness with which these cases were handled. The methods of execution adhered strictly to military protocol, executed with precision and without any hint of personal malice or personal vendetta. However, they were carried out with an unwavering determination that left no room for clemency. Among those sentenced was Gauss Schultz, the leader of the team involved in these clandestine operations. He faced trial before a military commission in the month of May in the year 1945 and was executed near the town of Branch on the 14th day of June. The reasons for the delay in Schultz's trial, why it was postponed until after the surrender of Germany, remain shrouded in mystery, as does who specifically issued the order for his execution. It was ultimately carried out by the United States Ninth Army, which enforced the sentence as part of its broader military operations. In total, 17 participants involved in Operation Greif faced execution by firing squad because they had worn enemy uniforms under circumstances that violated military laws. However, the operational achievements of Operation Greif were minimal at best. It failed to achieve any of its strategic objectives. Not a single bridge was captured, and major demolitions intended to cripple enemy infrastructure did not succeed. Critical communications remained largely intact, with only a few instances of signs being reversed or telephone lines being cut. A handful of American units received false commands, though most of these misinformation incidents were swiftly corrected. Despite the limited tactical results, the psychological toll was immense, far exceeding any tangible military gain. For many weeks, American forces operated under a pervasive sense of paranoia, assuming that German infiltrators could be lurking anywhere behind the lines. This heightened state of suspicion deeply influenced decision-making processes at every echelon within the Allied command structure. The confinement of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, during this period, meant he was largely cut off from the immediate battlefield observations during the crucial initial phase of the offensive. Such circumstances contributed to significant delays at key checkpoints, slowing the American response to the German penetration. Units that should have responded within hours were bogged down, taking days to reach their designated sectors. This widespread mistrust and suspicion fractured the cohesion of the units, undermining their effectiveness. American soldiers, instead of focusing solely on combat with the enemy to their front, found themselves preoccupied with fears that Germans might be among their own ranks. The infamous Battle of the Bulge, which would come to define this period, proceeded independently of the failure of Operation Griff. German forces managed to push deep into American lines, creating a bulge in the front, the feature that gave the battle its name. At Bastogne, a key strategic town, American defenders refused to capitulate despite being encircled and under siege. On December the 22nd, when German officers delivered a formal surrender ultimatum, Acting Commander Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responded with a single word: "Nuts," which has since become legendary and was interpreted by many as a defiant message of American resilience, roughly equating to a blunt, "Go to hell." Confused German officers, not understanding the significance of this reply, asked for clarification, and they were told it symbolized an emphatic rejection, similarly to the phrase, "Go to hell." The 101st Airborne Division held their position at Bastogne until they were relieved by Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army on December the 26th. In a remarkable maneuver, Patton's forces accomplished a 90-degree turn, driving northward to lift the siege. By early January, Allied counterattacks succeeded in eliminating the German salient, restoring the front lines to their previous positions. This intense and pivotal battle, spanning from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945, involved more than 1 million men from both sides, making it the largest engagement fought by the United States Army outside the context of the Civil War. American casualties surpassed 80,000 servicemen, including 19,000 killed and 23,000 captured. German casualties were of a similar magnitude, reflecting the ferocity and scale of the fighting that took place during these weeks and months. The attempt to recover what was lost proved unsuccessful. The intensity and scale of that effort could not replace the irreplaceable setbacks suffered during the campaign. This particular confrontation marked a decisive turning point, effectively ending Germany's capacity to carry out large-scale, coordinated offensive operations on the Western Front. It was a moment that underscored the gradual but relentless shift in the balance of power, signaling the decline of Germany's aggressive push into Western territories. Hitler, in a desperate gamble, had wagered all on the Ardennes offensive, a bold and risky strategy that aimed to split Allied defenses and deliver a blow that could potentially change the course of the war. Unfortunately for him, that gamble did not pay off, and the offensive ultimately failed to achieve its objectives, marking a significant blow to German military efforts. For Otto Skorzeny, the events surrounding Operation Grief, an operation that was meant to be a vital part of the larger offensive, culminated by December the 17th. On that day, the Panzer Brigade 150 transitioned from the fluid, irregular combat tactics characteristic of their recent operations into more conventional military engagements. This shift signified the end of their role in the offensive phase and a move toward more traditional forms of warfare, reflecting the changing nature of the conflict after the failure of the Ardennes offensive. A few days later, On December the 21st, the brigade made a bold but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to seize the town of Malmö. Despite several determined assaults, they were driven back each time, suffering setbacks that underscored the increasingly unfavorable conditions for the German forces. During these operations, Otto Skorzeny was wounded near Lineville when artillery shrapnel tore through his position. Although injured, he recovered sufficiently to continue his service, demonstrating resilience amid the chaos of war. His unwavering commitment kept him operational, and he remained actively involved until the final surrender of Germany in May of 1945. In that concluding chapter of the war, Skorzeny laid down his arms and surrendered to the American forces, specifically to the 30th Infantry Regiment. The subsequent 2 years saw him in custody, waiting patiently for the charges that would be levied against him when the war crimes trials commenced. In the year 1947, during the Dayton Harbor Authority (DHA) military tribunal proceedings, Skorzeny, along with 9 other officers from the Panzer Brigade 150, faced serious accusations. They stood charged with the improper use of American military uniforms, an offense that involved entering combat zones dressed in enemy gear and using this deception to attack or ambush American troops maliciously. Additional charges included the wrongful procurement of American uniforms and Red Cross parcels from prisoner of war camps, acts that violated the established laws of war and humanitarian standards. Throughout the trial, Skorzeny's defense hinged on a critical legal and tactical distinction. He argued that his orders had explicitly mandated his men to remove American uniforms before engaging in any form of combat. The uniforms were not intended to be used as a means of fighting but solely as a cover for infiltration, an espionage tactic designed to deceive the enemy and gather intelligence without detection. The key point was that these disguises were meant for strategic deception during wartime operations, not for active combat while disguised. The case took a pivotal turn when a surprise witness provided testimony that proved crucial to the outcome of the tribunal. Yo Thomas, a former British Special Operations officer with extensive experience behind enemy lines, testified to personal involvement with the same tactics. He shared that during missions across France, he had donned German uniforms and infiltrated enemy positions, describing such tactics as a common and accepted practice among Allied special units. His testimony helped clarify that the use of enemy uniforms for deception, when not used in direct combat, was a legitimate and accepted wartime practice, aligned with international principles of warfare. The tribunal was able to draw a clear line between the unauthorized use of enemy uniforms in combat and their legitimate use as a deception tactic. It was established that Otto Skorzeny's orders explicitly prohibited his men from engaging in combat while disguised, and there was no compelling evidence to demonstrate that he had directed or authorized them to fight while dressed in American uniforms. This distinction proved decisive, and as a result, all individuals involved were acquitted. The verdict generated considerable controversy, mainly because of the stark differences in how justice was applied. 17 soldiers from Skorzeny's unit faced execution for similar actions, wearing American uniforms in combat, actions for which Skorzeny himself was not convicted. The key difference lay in the timing of these incidents and the evidence available. The soldiers executed in December 1944 had been captured actively fighting while dressed in American gear, whereas Skorzeny's trial in 1947 focused on orders that had explicitly prohibited combat while in disguise. This contrast underscored the importance of context and legality in wartime conduct and set a significant legal precedent. The court's decision reinforced an important principle in the laws of war: the use of enemy uniforms for deception. when used appropriately and with precautions in the turbulent times of global conflict. Symbols such as baseball, Hollywood, state capitals, and movie stars emerged as powerful markers of cultural identity, serving a crucial role as tools of security during the crisis. These elements, rooted deeply in everyday life, became more than mere entertainment or geographical identifiers. They evolved into symbols of American cultural cohesion that could be relied upon in moments of extreme peril. When the nation faced threats from enemy infiltration, it was not just military strength or technological superiority that proved vital, but the shared cultural knowledge, an inborn understanding that Americans absorbed naturally from childhood. This cultural fabric, however chaotic or unorganized it seemed on the surface, played an unexpectedly effective role in uncovering spies and infiltrators. These enemy agents often came with language training and clandestine operations, yet they struggled to replicate the nuanced cultural knowledge that Americans had nurtured over generations, an intuitive familiarity with their own traditions, idioms, humor, and shared references. The subtleties of this cultural cohesion functioned as a security measure. More than just a sense of national pride, it was a deeply ingrained protective barrier that enemies found difficult to breach. The immense importance of this cultural unity was exemplified by the fate of the 17 men who were executed for their involvement in what was known as Operation Grafe. Today, their memory is preserved primarily through the military cemeteries and official historical accounts, where their graves at Lommel are maintained with the same reverence and meticulous care as those of soldiers killed in traditional combat. These memorials do not differentiate between those who perished as spies and those who fell fighting in combat. They are collectively honored as fallen soldiers of Germany. Among this group was Manfred Peruz, who was just 23 years old at the time of his execution. Gunther Billing, only 21, remained a firm believer in Nazi ideology until the very end, while Wilhelm Schmidt, aged 24, faced death with a quiet, resigned dignity. Each of these young men was a son, perhaps a brother. Each had made choices that led them to that cold morning in Belgium, to their posts, to their blindfolds, and to the rifles that ended their lives. The story of Operation Grafe extends beyond its immediate tactical failure to reveal larger truths about warfare and security. It demonstrated that special operations, while vital, cannot single-handedly compensate for failures in conventional military strategy. The operation's failure was not merely in its inability to capture bridges or accomplish its deceptive aims. Thousands of infiltrators were thwarted simply because the regular military units, like Piper's panzers, never reached the targets. No amount of clever deception or confusion could replace the strategic breakthrough that never materialized. Still, what Operation Grafe did achieve was a profound ripple effect. It created disruption and sowed confusion on a scale far beyond the actions of the actual infiltrators. The very possibility of infiltration incited panic across widespread sectors of the military, affecting hundreds of thousands of soldiers and creating a psychological atmosphere of suspicion and uncertainty. This divide between perception and reality, that a handful of spies could cause such chaos, became a vital lesson in modern military strategy and psychological warfare. It underscored the importance of psychological resilience and the perception of threat as much as actual enemy strength. By late January of the year 1945, the Battle of the Bulge concluded, marking a turning point as Allied forces pressed forward relentlessly toward Germany. Within a span of 4 months, the Third Reich collapsed entirely, culminating in Adolf Hitler's tragic suicide within his Berlin bunker. Germany formally surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945, bringing an official end to the war in Europe. The 17 men involved in Operation Grafe, who had been executed early on, were no longer among the living by this time. Their fight had ended violently in Belgium, far from their homeland. Although their operation failed tactically, it achieved a significant strategic outcome. The confusion and fear it generated hampered Allied military efforts during the critical initial phase of the final offensive. These disruptions, coupled with the psychological impact of espionage, proved to be powerful factors in the broader context of the conflict. During this same period, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill addressed Parliament on January 18, 1945, amid the ongoing chaos of the war. He expressed that this was arguably the greatest battle fought by the Americans during the entire conflict, a victory of extraordinary significance that would be remembered in history. Churchill specifically highlighted that the United States had committed 30 to 40 times more personnel to this campaign than the British, emphasizing the vast scale and intensity of the American effort. His words underscored not only the military might but also the strategic importance of the American contributions during this pivotal moment, illustrating how intertwined the efforts of these Allied nations were in ultimately securing victory over Nazi Germany. That particular engagement was, at its core, predominantly an American effort, culminating in an unequivocal American victory. The guards stationed at the checkpoint, who inquired about baseball and other elements of American culture, unwittingly played a part in creating living folklore. They were simply addressing an immediate, practical concern: how to distinguish potential enemies from allies in a tense and unpredictable situation. Their improvisation, rooted in a deep, intuitive understanding of American cultural references, proved remarkably effective. Because Americans had grown up immersed in baseball, Hollywood movies, and knowledge of their state capitals, these elements became an organic part of their shared identity. Americans absorbed this cultural fabric naturally through daily life, allowing it to become second nature. By contrast, Germans attempting to mimic American behavior and appearance could compile facts, such as names of baseball teams or details about Hollywood, but they lacked the ability to replicate that effortless cultural fluency that comes from genuine familiarity and shared experience. This distinction between knowledge acquired through formal learning and that gained through lived cultural immersion was critical and ultimately decisive. The Germans' failure to bridge this gap underscored a timeless truth. Real cultural understanding, a sense of how people think, behave, and connect, is extraordinarily difficult to teach or fake quickly. It is something that is built over years, even generations, through continuous exposure and participation, not merely through memorization or surface-level study. This insight remains relevant in modern military and intelligence operations. Since the days of Operation Grafe, Special Operations Forces have come to recognize the limitations of superficial cultural training. Modern intelligence agencies now dedicate tremendous efforts over extended periods, sometimes years, to prepare deep cover agents. The goal is to develop genuine cultural fluency, which cannot be instantaneously acquired. While language instruction, factual knowledge, and behavioral coaching are necessary components of preparation, they alone are insufficient. True cultural understanding hinges on deep immersion, practical experience, and a nuanced grasp of local customs, social norms, and worldview. The fundamental challenge of cultivating authentic cultural fluency has persisted for decades and continues to do so. Culture, by its very nature, is absorbed through lived experience, by participating, observing, and integrating into a community, rather than merely reading about it in books or classrooms. This reality poses a persistent obstacle for those seeking quick mastery of unfamiliar cultural landscapes. Operation Grafe served as a compelling illustration of both the potential and inherent limitations of special operations in unconventional warfare. Small, highly trained units can, through ingenuity and daring, generate disruption that belies their relatively modest sizes. The psychological impact of their actions can often surpass tactical results significantly, inspiring fear or confusion among larger enemy forces and sowing chaos far beyond their immediate reach. However, without the groundwork of conventional military success, such as securing territory, establishing stable control, or achieving strategic objectives, these specialized operations are often unable to deliver long-term, strategic results. Deception and psychological warfare can augment the overall effort but cannot replace the tangible victories on the battlefield. Their efficacy is ultimately dependent on the broader context of military victory. For military historians and strategists, Operation Grafe remains a notable case study that underscores the importance of realistic planning and accurate assessment of operational capabilities. It exemplifies how aspirations and ambitious tactics can falter or succeed depending on whether they are grounded in practical reality. The decision-making process during late World War II, especially under Hitler's leadership, often followed this pattern. Grandiose in conception, yet hampered by limited resources and divorced from operational feasibility. Hitler's late war decisions, characterized by ambitious but impractical plans, highlight the dangers of disconnecting strategic visions from reality. Yet, despite its failures, Operation Grafe unexpectedly achieved a measure of success that validated certain principles of psychological warfare. Its unintended outcome, in creating widespread panic and confusion, demonstrated that deception and misinformation could serve as powerful force multipliers. The tragic deaths of the 17 men who were executed before firing squads for wearing enemy uniforms, men whose stories might otherwise have been forgotten, are preserved in history precisely because of the record that documents their sacrifice. These men, who held no particular significance beforehand and had little notable achievement before being captured, were part of a failed operation. Their ultimate fate exemplified the risks inherent in covert warfare and the importance of strict identity verification in combat zones. Their executions helped to clarify legal standards regarding the use of enemy uniforms in warfare, setting precedents that still influence military and legal practices today. The enduring legacy of their sacrifice lies in the lessons they imparted. That understanding and verifying cultural and personal identity remains paramount for security and combat effectiveness. It also reaffirmed that cultural knowledge is notoriously difficult for outsiders to mimic convincingly on short notice. Special operations forces, despite their skill and resourcefulness, cannot substitute for the broader successes achieved through conventional military engagement. In the complex framework of international law and warfare, the principles of legality and proper conduct continue to assert their importance. In sum, the story of Operation Grafe encapsulates both the promise and the limitations inherent in unconventional warfare. It underscores the fact that while small units can produce significant psychological effects and strategic disruption, these efforts must be war, by its very nature, holds an inherent complexity that often defies straightforward judgment, with its true toll extending far beyond the immediate battlefield. The human costs of conflict encompass not only those who lose their lives in direct combat but also include the somber and often tragic instances of executions carried out after prisoners are captured and found guilty of violations of wartime laws. Each of these execution cases involved individuals, fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, whose lives and personal histories were abruptly and irreversibly ended by gunfire. These acts were carried out under the veneer of legal authority, following proper judicial procedures, yet they nonetheless resulted in the termination of human potential and the fragmentation of families. The graves at La Marque stand as silent witnesses to lives curtailed by the relentless logic of war and its brutal consequences, reminding us of the profound human cost embedded within military conflicts. Within this framework of wartime realities, the soldiers manning checkpoints, specifically those involved in questioning individuals about seemingly trivial matters, such as baseball, were, in fact, American servicemen mandated to follow orders. These men carried with them a heavy psychological burden, shaped by the moral and emotional toll of executing prisoners, including those convicted of acts such as espionage. Their role was not merely to enforce security but also to grapple with the moral complexities of their actions during a time of intense conflict. The operation known as Operation Grief exemplifies a scenario where strategic intent fell short. It failed to seize a critical bridge and caused no significant damage or disruption to enemy forces. Despite its lack of tactical success, the operation's impact extended beyond physical destruction, influencing morale and resource allocation. While Operation Grief resulted in the relatively limited loss of American lives directly, numbering only a few, the fear it instilled in the broader military and civilian population had far-reaching effects. This fear led to delays in reinforcements reaching the front lines, hampered decision-making processes within command structures, and diverted much-needed resources during pivotal days of the campaign. Although difficult to measure precisely, the psychological ripple effects of such operations played a vital role in shaping the early phases of the battle. The swift apprehension, trial, and subsequent execution of infiltrators within a matter of days exemplified the harsh realities of wartime discipline and the urgent need to maintain order, even if such procedures would be considered overly hasty or lacking in modern standards of justice today. The rapid transition from capture to execution was a reflection of the intense combat conditions under which the soldiers operated. It also set a precedent in wartime justice that prioritized swift justice over deliberation. Yet, from a contemporary perspective, the standards of military justice would demand more thorough, careful proceedings before such severe actions could be taken. The Battle of the Bulge endured for over 5 additional weeks after these executions, ultimately culminating in a German defeat and the depletion of Germany's strategic reserve forces. The prolonged engagement underscored that the consequences of individual operations, even those not entirely successful, could influence the broader course and outcome of a major military campaign. The tales surrounding Operation Grief, intertwined with the Battle of the Bulge, serve as poignant reminders that warfare transcends mere tactical maneuvers. The psychological impact on soldiers, the cultural and societal factors at play, and the perceptions of threat all possess the power to shape outcomes just as significantly as direct combat. A failed operation, one that sows panic and uncertainty, can sometimes induce more strategic disturbance than a victory that remains under the cover of secrecy and appears inconsequential. In the chaos of war, the perception of threat and vulnerability often influences decision-making more profoundly than physical destruction alone. The interrogations conducted at checkpoints, which at times might have appeared absurd or overly simplistic, ultimately proved effective because they targeted a fundamental aspect of American identity and knowledge, something that genuine Americans possessed naturally and effortlessly. Infiltrators, despite their extensive training, found it difficult or impossible to convincingly replicate these cultural and national traits during questioning. The soldiers who fought during the Battle of the Bulge confronted not only a formidable enemy offensive but also the psychological strain of constantly questioning the motives and identities of those around them. The pervasive suspicion that enemies could be disguised in any uniform, speak any language, or adopt any guise represented a new dimension in warfare, one where certainty was eroding and trust was fragile. This decline in absolute certainty about friend and foe marked a turning point in military strategy and intelligence operations that would leave lasting implications. Future security procedures and counterintelligence efforts would be shaped by this new reality, emphasizing vigilance and the importance of simple, reliable methods of detecting deception. The psychological and tactical challenges faced during this period influenced the evolution of warfare, pushing militaries to develop more nuanced, sophisticated approaches to combat and intelligence, which continue to influence military doctrine today. In essence, the history of operations like Grief and the Battle of the Bulge exemplifies a broader truth. Warfare is as much a battleground of perceptions, psychological resilience, and cultural understanding as it is of guns, tanks, and armies. The intricate interplay